she directs our immigration rights clinic. Prior to entering academia, she worked at the ACLU of Northern California, as well as
the most notorious executive order in American history was Executive Order 9066, which required the exclusion of persons of Japanese descent from the west coast of the United States and their movement to relocation centers, the internment camps in the Trans Mountain West. That executive order led ultimately to passage of a statute and then to the cases, the Korematsu case, that if you Googled anything earlier this week, you saw a picture of Fred Korematsu, and the Endo case, and ultimately Congress agreed that there had been no basis for the internment, no basis for the executive order at all, and the United States issued a formal apology and reparations, and I dare say we should start getting ourselves ready to do that again. There are some good executive orders, though I don't want you to think that executive orders are always illegitimate. One of the most important of these is Executive Order 11246, which is the executive order that requires federal contractors to engage in affirmative action and to make sure that their jobs and their employment practices are.
The one that's been getting the most press lately is protecting the nation from foreign terrorist entry into the United States, which I'll call the travel ban. Before I get into the details, some of the highlights and lowlights, more like lowlights of the executive order, I wanted to just go through a couple of overarching points. One is that generally speaking, these three executive orders are worded very broadly and very vaguely. These are not specific, tailored executive orders that track the language of the immigration statute, and that leads to the second point, which is the condition of uncertainty. As it is, whenever we're advising clients facing the immigration laws and in their operation and their cases, there's always uncertainty. But we're in a special condition of uncertainty and constantly shifting advice and guidance because the executive orders are vaguely worded and there's not that much in the way of guidance from the federal government. So we've all heard the campaign promises, build a wall, Mexico will pay for it. This is the executive order that attempts to set that plan in motion. In terms of the wall itself, the specifics provide that there should be plans to start building a border wall and provision of resources for the wall. Of course, we know that Congress has to appropriate funds for that to move forward in any meaningful way. The second subpart of the border wall, the key point, is a massive expansion of immigration detention at the border and in the interior. Here again, the executive order is very vague in terms of the specifics, but the general language suggests a broad expansion of the use of immigration detention for people who are at the border, as well as people who are in removal proceedings or deportation proceedings in the interior. The third point is an expansion of expedited removal. Expedited removal is a process by which somebody can be deported from the United States without ever seeing an immigration judge. Right now, that applies close to the border, typically within 100 miles of the border, and within 14 days of entry. The executive order suggests that that will be expanded to the maximum extent allowed by law. What that means is anybody's guess, but the maximum extent is defined by the statute, and it could be possible that the government will try to expand this expedited removal without due process to the interior of the United States. And that would cause immense tragedy. If you think about all of the people you know who are in the U.S. without papers, the consequences could be really, really tragic. Another portion of
and to think of these policies as informed by legitimate national security considerations, and to think that that is what is driving them would be a mistake. So I want to illustrate that claim at the level of specific policies and structural decision making, and then to conclude by saying what a few implications might be for these policies. So first, just a very specific, simple policy illustration. So note that two of the executive orders issued last week, the one on sanctuary cities and the travel ban, require the government to issue regular public reports of crimes committed by immigrants. So one requires a list of crimes by deportable immigrants. The other, the travel ban, requires a public listing of acts of terrorism and honor killings and gender-based violence committed by foreign nationals. Now think about this for a moment. That it is not an attempt to address or report on crime in general, or terrorism in general, or gender-based violence in general. It's specifically an attempt to catalog and publicize just the crimes of foreigners. Now, of course, if you focus just on these crimes in any gory detail and catalog those numbers, and not the proportionately much larger number of crimes committed by citizens, okay, you're going to perpetuate a myth that there's a crisis of violence by foreigners. It generates fear of outsiders, especially in this case, Latinos and Muslims. And that's something that we know that Breitbart News, Steve Bannon's enterprise, has done expertly for some time. But now that is something that's being pushed by the White House itself, through our policy. So second, a structural illustration. So from what we know, the executive order on the travel ban was apparently issued without review by the Department of Homeland Security, the Justice Department, State Department, or the Defense Department. So these are the agencies that you would assume would be involved with any important national security decision that was actually taken in the legitimate and rational pursuit of national security. Yet these agencies were completely sidelined. And instead, Steve Bannon and Stephen Miller, two political operatives in the White House, from what we know, appear to have drafted and drove the policy. This past weekend, Bannon, again, the leader of the extreme right-wing news like Breitbart News, was elevated to the National Security Council, despite lack of national security experience. At the same time, the Director of National Intelligence and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff were demoted from the council and just asked to attend on an as-invited basis rather than as regular members. Also, Trump's National Security Advisor, General Flynn, is now someone who is directly under the president, and some of you may know, he has called Islam a cancer, served on the advisory board of the anti-Muslim hate group, and he and other individuals who have come from that ideological and political background are now the center of making national security policy, not at the fringes. The administration is also elevating officials who led some of the worst human rights abuses during the early post-9/11 period. So just today, the CIA appointed as deputy director the individual who ran a secret CIA prison in Thailand where detainees were waterboarded, and who later helped destroy videotaped evidence of it. So, where will all this lead? And don't want to be overly speculative, but I think if you think of it in these terms, then undoubtedly you will see many effects on our foreign policy and domestic policy. At the very least, speaking of domestic policy, besides more restrictions on immigration, we will likely see a concerted attack on a vast range of Muslim civil society institutions and individuals in the community in the United States. Just in the interest of time, I'll end here, but I think it's important to think of this in that context rather than to simply